What do you think is the opposite of love? Many will quickly respond with the word hate. Others will propose apathy or indifference. A few might even suggest control or death. At first glance, each of these answers seems reasonable, perhaps even convincing. Yet if we look more closely, we notice that none of them are truly the opposite of love. Hate, for instance, is not love's enemy. It is not even entirely separate from love. Rather, it is love's distorted shadow, a twisted reflection that trembles under its own weight. Hate cannot stand on its own, for it always leans on something deeper. And if we trace its roots far enough, we eventually discover fear. Fear is the hidden engine that gives rise to hate, jealousy, arrogance, ignorance, and cruelty. Without fear, these darker states lose their energy. Consider the man who boasts of his cruelty, who delights in dominating others and making them suffer. On the surface, he appears strong, commanding, even fearsome. People may tremble in his presence, yet beneath the bluster, beneath the hard mask, lies the raw terror of being powerless, of being unworthy, of being nothing at all. His cruelty is not born of strength, but of fear. His desire to inflict pain arises from the panic of insignificance. It is easier to dominate than to face the fragile trembling within himself. Now look at jealousy. It feels sharp, bitter, consuming. It gnaws at the heart and poisons relationships. Yet at its core, jealousy is simply fear in disguise. Fear of not being enough, fear of being abandoned, fear of being unseen. The jealous lover does not lash out because of genuine hatred toward another, but because of an internal whisper. I am not worthy of being chosen. I will be left behind. I will disappear. This trembling fear of loss becomes jealousy's fuel, and it burns both the one who feels it and the one it is directed toward. Or consider arrogance. At first sight, it looks like confidence. It speaks loudly, it insists on certainty, it fills a room with its presence. But arrogance, if we look closely, is only the endless attempt to cover a wound. The arrogant man must keep proving himself again and again, because deep down he is terrified of being small, invisible, insignificant. His pride is the mask he wears to hide the fear that without constant assertion, no one will notice him. What appears to be strength is in truth a fragile shield against his own trembling. And think of the stubbornly ignorant person, the one who insists on always being right, who argues endlessly and refuses to listen. Outwardly, it may look like strength or certainty, but if you look beneath the surface, you will see fear driving the show. Fear of being wrong, fear of being exposed, fear that if their ideas collapse, they themselves will collapse with them. Their stubbornness is not wisdom, but a barricade against vulnerability. It is fear masquerading as conviction. So if we want to understand the root of cruelty, of arrogance, of hatred and jealousy, we must not stop at the surface. These are not the root causes themselves. They are branches, shadows, symptoms. The root that feeds them all is fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of death. Remove fear, and the whole house of suffering crumbles. Look carefully at human behavior, and you will see how much of it is quietly driven by the fragile sense of self we call the ego. The ego is not who we truly are, but the story of me we carry around. It is a bundle of memories, labels, and roles we mistake for our essence. It says, I am what I own. I am what others think of me. I am the sum of my achievements. Because it is only a story, the ego is always afraid. Deep down, it knows it is fragile. that its image can be torn apart in an instant. This is why people cling so tightly to possessions. It is not the objects themselves that matter so much, but the sense that losing them would mean losing a piece of themselves. To misplace a treasured item or to have something stolen is experienced not merely as inconvenience, but as a wound to the ego. Similarly, people chase recognition and status not purely out of joy, but because the ego cannot bear to be unseen. To be overlooked feels like annihilation, and so human beings lash out, grasp, dominate, and defend, not because they are evil at their core, but because their ego is terrified of disappearing. When you understand this, you stop taking people's behavior so personally. The cruelty, the stubbornness, the arrogance you encounter are not really about you at all. They are desperate attempts to protect a fragile sense of self. Suddenly, instead of seeing an enemy, you begin to see a frightened child hiding behind a mask. And if you have ever looked honestly at yourself, you will recognize the same patterns within your own heart. We have all lied, defended, attacked, or withdrawn, not out of love, but out of fear that the ego might shatter. We know the trembling within our own chest, the fear of rejection, the fear of exposure, the fear of not being enough. And when you notice the same fear alive in yourself, the walls of judgment start to crack. You can no longer despise them so easily because you recognize the very same trembling in your own being. Compassion grows where condemnation once stood. This recognition gives rise to a profound question. What is this fear that haunts the ego? For most of what we call fear has very little to do with the present moment. It is not about the situation right here and now. Rather, it is almost always about tomorrow, about things that have not yet arrived. We are remarkably ingenious in this regard. We invent entire museums of fear. Fear of losing our job, fear of losing our looks, fear of not being clever enough, fear of rejection, fear of being overlooked, fear of death. The imagination is tireless in its ability to create future terrors. And yet the strange thing is this: the harder we try to feel secure, the more anxious we become. It is rather like trying to hold water tightly in your fist. The tighter the grip, the faster it runs through your fingers. Our attempts at control create more turbulence, not less. Security remains elusive precisely because the ego demands it as a condition for peace. If we look more closely, we see where this fear comes from. Fear is always the companion of attachment. The moment you cling to something, a person, a possession, a position, you also begin to worry it might slip away. You fall in love, and immediately in the same package comes the fear of loss. She may leave you. He may betray you. Someone more dazzling may arrive. Fear is the twin born alongside attachment. Yet if you pause for a moment, you realize something astonishing. Before this person came into your life, you were already whole. You lived, you breathed, you laughed, you endured. You did not need them in order to exist. You will do so again, even if they leave. The ego forgets this because it has mistaken possession for identity. But the truth is that you are already complete, even before and after what you cling to. The same goes for the endless parade of what-ifs that march through the mind. What if I lose my job? What if the bank collapses? What if I embarrass myself? 1,000 worries follow one another, and yet most of them never materialize. Yesterday you carried them too, and yet here you are, still alive, still intact. Human beings are astonishingly adaptable. We can live in deserts, jungles, frozen poles. We can endure heartbreak, disappointment, and loss. We are built for resilience. So the curious truth is that fear is not really about events themselves. It is about our resistance to change, our desperate hope that life should remain exactly as it is. And yet that is the one thing life never does. It always moves, shifts, evolves. To resist this is to suffer. To flow with it is to find peace. To truly see fear for what it is, one must stop running from it. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape fear. They avoid it, they numb it, they disguise it in distractions, or they fight against it. But fear that is resisted only grows stronger. It becomes a ghost that haunts every decision. The irony is that when we finally turn to look directly at fear, when we sit with it and allow it to show itself fully, we discover that it is far less solid than it seemed. Fear thrives in shadows, in the places we refuse to look. Once it is brought into the light of awareness, it begins to dissolve. When a child is afraid of the dark, the monsters seem enormous and real. But the moment a light is switched on, the shadows are revealed as nothing more than furniture, clothes on a chair, the shapes of ordinary life. The fear was not in the objects themselves, but in the child's refusal to look. In the same way, when we bring awareness to our fears, we discover that most of them are constructed out of imagination. They are shadows cast by the mind. This does not mean that danger does not exist. Of course, life contains challenges, loss, and uncertainty, but danger is what is present in the moment. Fear is the projection into the future. If a car is rushing toward you, your body leaps out of the way. That is intelligence, not fear. It is the body's wisdom in action. Fear, however, is the endless rehearsing of possible dangers that are not here yet. It is the mind trying to prepare for every possible outcome, exhausting itself in a theater of illusions. This theater becomes the stage on which most people live their entire lives. They rehearse arguments that have not happened. They prepare excuses for failures that have not arrived. They mourn losses that have not occurred. In doing so, they live more in imagination than in reality. Life itself slips through their fingers while they are busy preparing for it. Fear robs the present moment, the only place where life actually exists. The ego, desperate for control, insists that fear is necessary. If I do not worry, it says, I will not be prepared. If I let go of fear, disaster will strike. And so we believe that fear is a form of protection. But look closely. Has fear ever truly protected you? Did worrying ever stop loss from coming? Did rehearsing catastrophes ever prevent them? In truth, fear has only stolen your peace while providing nothing in return. It is like paying an endless tax to a government that never delivers services. You suffer in advance, and then sometimes you suffer again when the thing you feared arrives, and often it does not arrive at all. The deeper tragedy is that fear, once believed, begins to shape our very lives. We avoid opportunities because of fear. We silence ourselves because of fear. We stay in relationships that suffocate us because of fear. We hoard possessions we do not need because of fear. Entire lives are shaped not by love or creativity, but by the narrow corridors of fear. This is why so many reach the end of life with regret. They realize they were never truly living, but only trying to prevent imaginary dangers. What then is the way beyond fear? It is not resistance, for resistance only feeds it. Nor is it indulgence, for indulging fear only makes it grow. The way is presence. When you bring your awareness fully into this moment, you see that fear belongs to a time that does not yet exist. In the clarity of presence, fear cannot survive. It is like mist in sunlight. It evaporates when it is no longer fed by the shadows of thought. To practice presence is to notice the stories fear tells and to gently return again and again to what is here now. You breathe, you feel the ground beneath your feet, you see the colors around you, hear the sounds in the air, sense the life in your own body. In this moment, is there truly a threat? Most often, the answer is no. The future may bring challenges, but here, now, life is unfolding. By anchoring yourself in presence, you cut off the fuel that fear requires. And when fear dissolves, something astonishing appears in its place. You discover that beneath fear's noise, there has always been a quiet strength. It is not the strength of domination or control, but the strength of being. It is the unshakable foundation that life itself provides. The trees do not fear the wind, they sway with it. The rivers do not fear the rocks, they flow around them. The sky does not fear the storm, it contains it. Life itself is vast enough to hold every change, every loss, every death. And you are not separate from life. You are an expression of it. From this perspective, even death, the fear that underlies all fears, begins to lose its sting. For death, too, is only frightening when viewed through the ego's lens. The ego clings to its story of self, and so death appears as annihilation. But if you see that you are more than this story, that you are life itself flowing in countless forms, death becomes simply a transformation, a return. Just as the wave is not destroyed when it merges back into the ocean, so too are you not destroyed when the body dissolves. You were never the story to begin with. When this truth is glimpsed, fear loosens its grip. You realize you do not need to control everything in order to be safe. You do not need to predict the future in order to be whole. You do not need to cling to people or possessions to affirm your existence. Life is carrying you even now, as it always has. The breath comes and goes without your effort. The heart beats without your command. The earth spins, the stars burn, and you are held within it all. Fear begins to look less like protection and more like a thief. And when fear recedes, love naturally arises. Not the grasping love of attachment, but the spacious love that sees clearly. Love is what remains when fear is gone. It is the openness that allows life to flow, the gentleness that recognizes itself in others, the compassion that understands that everyone is trembling in their own way. Love does not need to conquer fear, for fear has no substance once it is seen. Love simply reveals what was true all along, that life is vast, interconnected, and safe in its essence. This recognition transforms relationships. Instead of clinging to others out of fear of loss, you are free to love them as they are. Instead of demanding that they complete you, you celebrate the completeness already present. Instead of fearing their departure, you honor their presence while it lasts. And when they leave, whether by choice or by death, you grieve, but you do not collapse. For you know that your being is not diminished by their absence. Love that is free of fear is not fragile but unshakable. Such love also transforms your relationship with yourself. No longer do you need to constantly prove your worth. No longer do you need to chase achievement to silence the fear of inadequacy. You see that you are already whole, already an expression of life's vastness. This recognition does not lead to passivity, but to freedom. You are free to create, to explore, to give, not because you must prove yourself, but because life delights in expressing itself through you. This is the great turning, to shift from a life governed by fear to a life illuminated by love. It is not achieved once and for all. Fear may return, whispering its stories again. But each time you see it clearly, each time you bring presence to its illusions, you weaken its hold. Gradually, love becomes the ground you stand on, and fear becomes nothing more than passing weather in the vast sky of your being. Fear often hides behind many disguises, and one of its cleverest masks is arrogance. Arrogance appears as confidence, as certainty, as superiority. Yet if you look closely, you will see that beneath arrogance lies trembling insecurity. The arrogant man is terrified of being small, of being unseen, of being insignificant. And so he builds a fortress of pride to protect himself. Every boast is a plea for recognition. Every dismissal of others is a desperate attempt to silence the voice inside that whispers, "You are not enough." In truth, arrogance is fear wearing a crown. Consider also the stubborn person, the one who refuses to admit they are wrong, who clings tightly to their opinions and attacks anyone who disagrees. On the surface, this looks like strength, but in reality, it is fear of being exposed. To admit a mistake feels like annihilation to the fragile ego. So the stubborn person digs in deeper, not because they are secure, but because they are afraid. Fear drives the performance, and the performance must continue lest the mask slip and reveal the trembling child beneath. Jealousy, too, is fear in disguise. It appears as anger, as bitterness, as suspicion. But at its root, it is the fear of abandonment, the fear of not being enough, the fear of being overlooked. The jealous lover does not lash out because they love too much, but because they fear too deeply. They cannot trust the beloved to stay because they do not trust themselves to be worthy. And so they grasp, they accuse, they control, all attempts to hold back the tide of fear that threatens to sweep them away. Cruelty, likewise, often springs from fear. The bully who torments others is not truly strong, but terrified of his own weakness. By inflicting pain, he tries to escape his own. By making others small, he tries to feel large. But beneath the violence lies a frightened heart, desperate not to be seen as powerless. Fear is the puppeteer, and cruelty is only the puppet's dance. When we see this clearly, our view of human behavior changes. Instead of seeing enemies, we see frightened beings acting out their fear. The harsh words, the cold silences, the manipulations, the aggressions, these are all strategies to protect a fragile sense of self. And once you see this, compassion arises. For you realize that you too have worn these masks. You too have boasted to cover insecurity, argued to avoid exposure, clung out of fear of loss. When you recognize in yourself the very fear that drives others, judgment softens. You cannot despise them, for you see yourself reflected in their trembling. This recognition does not excuse harmful behavior, but it does explain it. It reveals that beneath the surface, every human is grappling with the same root, fear. And this understanding changes how we respond. Instead of reacting with anger, we can respond with presence. Instead of escalating conflict, we can offer calm. Instead of hardening our hearts, we can allow compassion to guide us. This does not mean becoming passive or tolerating abuse. It means addressing behavior without forgetting the fear that fuels it. The truth is, most of what we call evil in the world is nothing more than fear playing out on a grand scale. Wars are fought because leaders fear losing power. Corruption spreads because people fear scarcity. Prejudice thrives because groups fear being displaced. Entire societies are structured around the avoidance of fear, yet in trying to avoid it, they perpetuate it. Fear breeds division, and division breeds more fear in an endless cycle. But cycles can be broken. They are sustained only by blindness. When awareness enters, when fear is recognized for what it is, the cycle weakens. Imagine if, instead of meeting arrogance with scorn, we saw the fear beneath it. Imagine if, instead of responding to cruelty with hatred, we recognize the trembling heart that hides behind violence. This shift in perception does not instantly change the world, but it changes how we move within it. And one shift can ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. Within ourselves, this shift is even more profound. When we stop blaming others and begin to recognize fear within, we take the first step toward freedom. It is easy to point fingers, to say, they are arrogant, they are cruel, they are jealous. But have you not in some form done the same? Have you never spoken harshly out of insecurity? Never clung too tightly out of fear of loss? Never dismissed another to protect your pride? To see this honestly is humbling, yet it is also liberating. For if you can see fear at work within yourself, you can begin to release its grip. The ego resists this honesty. It does not want to be seen through. It thrives on stories of superiority and blame. It says, I am not the problem, they are. And yet, when we dare to look, we see the truth, the same fear that drives others' lives within us. We are not separate from humanity's struggles. We carry them in our own hearts. This recognition is not condemnation, but connection. It means that in facing our own fear, we contribute to the healing of the whole. How then do we face fear within ourselves? We begin by noticing it. Each time anger flares, ask, what fear lies beneath this? Each time jealousy arises, ask, what am I afraid of losing? Each time pride swells, ask, what insecurity am I covering? In this way, fear is revealed, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. It points to the places where the ego feels most fragile, where healing is needed. To see fear clearly is already to weaken it. For fear thrives in shadows and shrinks in light. And what is discovered again and again is that fear is rarely about the present. Most of what we fear belongs not to now, but to tomorrow. It is fear of what might happen, not of what is. Fear whispers of abandonment, yet in this moment, you are here, alive, breathing. Fear whispers of failure, yet in this moment, nothing is demanded of you but presence. Fear whispers of death, yet in this moment, life is flowing through you. Fear always points away from the present, and so the antidote is always the same. Return to now. This does not mean denying fear or pretending it does not exist. It means meeting it directly without running away into distraction or drowning in its stories. It means feeling the trembling in the body, the tightening in the chest, the quickening of breath, and simply allowing it. Fear as sensation is not unbearable. What is unbearable are the stories we weave around it. Strip away the stories and fear is only energy moving through the body. It rises, peaks, and passes like a wave. What gives it power is the mind's insistence on naming, dramatizing, and clinging. So the practice is simple, though not always easy. Feel without naming, allow without resisting, notice without dramatizing. In doing so, fear is revealed as insubstantial, as passing, as incapable of defining who you are. And gradually you see that beneath fear's noise, there is a deeper stillness. that stillness is not afraid because it does not depend on conditions. It is the stillness of being itself, the ground of awareness that remains untouched by the comings and goings of thought and sensation. To live from this stillness is to live free. Fear may still arise, but it no longer rules you. It is like weather passing across the sky. You notice it, you feel it, but you do not mistake it for the sky itself. The sky remains vast, open, unaffected, and so does your true nature. When this is realized, arrogance dissolves, jealousy loses its grip, cruelty loses its lure. For all were only masks worn by fear, and fear itself was only a shadow mistaken for substance. If we trace fear to its root, we find that it is always tied to attachment. The moment you cling to something, you begin to fear losing it. The moment you identify with something, you begin to fear its disappearance. This is why love, which should be the most liberating of experiences, so often carries with it the seed of fear. You fall in love, and immediately there arises the fear of loss. What if they leave? What if they betray? What if someone else takes their place? The love itself is not fearful, but the attachment, the clinging of ego, creates fear. The same is true with possessions. We believe that objects give us security, but in truth, they give us fear. The more we own, the more we have to lose. A person with nothing can walk freely. A person with much wealth must constantly worry about thieves, about collapse, about misfortune. It is not the object itself that binds us, but the attachment we weave around it. We project our identity into possessions, and so the threat of loss becomes a threat to self. Status and recognition, too, become sources of fear. The ego craves to be seen, to be admired, to be validated, but the moment it receives recognition, it trembles, for recognition can be lost. The higher the pedestal, the greater the fear of falling. So people chase status, but they cannot enjoy it, because every gain carries the shadow of loss. The applause of today becomes the anxiety of tomorrow. What if they stop applauding? What if they turn against me? What if I am forgotten? This endless cycle of attachment and fear creates suffering. We imagine that by clinging we secure ourselves, but in reality we enslave ourselves. The tighter the grip, the greater the fear. It is like trying to hold water in your hands. The harder you squeeze, the faster it slips away. And so life becomes a restless struggle to hold on, to preserve, to control, all the while haunted by the inevitability of change. The truth is that everything we cling to is impermanent. People change, possessions decay, bodies age, circumstances shift. Life itself is movement, a river that never stands still. To cling is to resist this movement, to demand that the river stop flowing. But life never obeys. It flows on, indifferent to our grasping. This is why fear is inevitable wherever there is attachment. To cling is to fear, for clinging is built on denial of impermanence. Yet we forget this simple truth. We act as though our clinging can make things permanent, as though love will never end, possessions will never decay, bodies will never die. And when change inevitably comes, we are shattered. We call it tragedy, but in truth, it is only the natural unfolding of life. The tragedy lies not in change itself, but in our refusal to accept it. Think of the countless hours people spend in anxious what-ifs. What if I lose my job? What if I fail this exam? What if the market crashes? What if I embarrass myself? What if my loved one leaves? These fears consume us, yet most of them never come true. We carry them day after day, But when tomorrow arrives, the disaster we feared is not there. Instead of recognizing this, we invent new fears, carrying them as though they were necessities. We live burdened by ghosts of the future, while life itself slips away unnoticed. The irony is that before we gained what we now fear losing, we lived without it. Before the relationship, we were whole. Before the job, we managed. Before the possession, we survived. But once we attach, we convince ourselves we cannot live without it. The mind forgets that it once knew how to be without, and so it trembles with fear of return. Yet life, with its astonishing adaptability, shows us again and again that we can survive change. We lose, we grieve, we adapt, and we continue. Human beings are among the most adaptable creatures on Earth. We survive deserts, jungles, tundras. We endure famine, flood, fire. We adjust to new cultures, new technologies, new circumstances. Yet in our minds, we imagine ourselves fragile. We fear we cannot withstand change when in truth, change is our nature. To resist change is to resist ourselves. To fear impermanence is to fear life itself, for impermanence is the very fabric of existence. So what is the way through this fear? It begins with acceptance, not resignation, but recognition. Life changes. People come and go. Possessions appear and disappear. The body rises and falls. To accept this is not to give up, but to align with reality. When we align with reality, fear begins to fade. For fear is always born of denial. When you stop denying impermanence, you stop fearing it. This acceptance does not mean indifference. It does not mean we stop loving or stop caring. In fact, it deepens love. When you know that someone will not be here forever, you cherish them more. When you know that possessions will not last, you enjoy them while they are here. When you know that life itself is temporary, you live more fully. Acceptance of impermanence transforms fear into appreciation. To live in this way is to live lightly. You hold everything with open hands. You allow it to come. You allow it to go. You do not grasp, and so you do not tremble. You participate fully in life, but you do not bind yourself with clinging. And in this freedom, joy arises. For joy is not found in possession, but in presence. Not in permanence, but in participation. Of course, the ego resists this. The ego says, if I do not cling, I will lose. If I do not fear, I will be unprepared. But the truth is the opposite. Clinging guarantees suffering, fear guarantees unrest. Letting go opens the possibility of peace. It does not guarantee that you will not face loss, but it frees you from suffering twice, once in imagination and once in reality. Letting go allows you to meet life as it is instead of being consumed by what might be. The river of life flows whether you cling or not. The choice is whether to be dragged by it, resisting and fearful, or to float with it, trusting its current. The river has carried you this far, from birth through every change, every loss, every transformation. It will carry you still. When you trust this, fear loosens. You discover that you do not need to control the river, for you are the river. And so the practice is simple. Release. Release the clinging to possessions, to people, to stories of self. Release not in the sense of abandonment, but in the sense of freedom. Love fully, but without grasping. Care deeply, but without clinging. Participate wholeheartedly, but without fear of loss. For nothing in life was ever truly yours to begin with. Everything is a gift of the river, passing through your hands for a time. When this is understood, fear no longer dominates. Loss may still come, but it does not destroy you. Change may still arrive, but it does not terrify you. Death itself may approach, but it does not paralyze you, for you have learned the secret. Everything changes, and that is not a curse but a blessing. It means life is alive, dynamic, flowing. It means that even when something ends, something else begins. To live without fear of loss is to live in freedom, and in that freedom, love flowers. Love that is not born of clinging, love that does not tremble with fear of departure, love that is vast, spacious, and unshakable. This is the love that is only possible when fear has been seen through and released. To live in such freedom does not mean withdrawing from life or becoming indifferent to its play. On the contrary, it means engaging more deeply, more authentically, and more fully. When fear no longer dictates your choices, you are able to step into life with openness. You do not avoid relationships because you fear heartbreak. You do not cling to them because you fear abandonment. You meet people as they are, in the present moment, without projecting your insecurities into the future. This is what makes love pure, when it is not a transaction, not a defense against loneliness, not a strategy to secure permanence, but a simple flowering of the heart in presence. Imagine the difference between hope. In each encounter, fear dissolves a little, replaced by trust in life's capacity to carry us through. Trust is the antidote to fear. Trust does not mean naive optimism, pretending that nothing painful will happen. It means confidence that whatever happens, we can meet it, we can endure it, we can grow through it. Trust is not about controlling outcomes, but about surrendering to process. Just as a tree trusts the changing seasons, we too can trust the rhythms of life. Winter may come, stripping us bare, but spring returns. Loss may come, but renewal follows. Trust knows that beneath change, there is continuity. Beneath impermanence, there is life itself, flowing and enduring. This trust grows when we pay attention. Look at your own life. How many times have you feared disaster, only to find a path open? How many times have you feared you could not endure, only to discover strength you did not know you had? How many times has life surprised you, offering gifts hidden within difficulties? When we see this pattern clearly, trust deepens. We realize that fear has always exaggerated, while life has always carried us forward. To live without being dominated by fear is not to eliminate uncertainty, but to embrace it. Life is uncertain by nature. The future is unknown, and that is its beauty. If everything were predetermined, life would be a lifeless script. Uncertainty is the space in which creativity blooms, in which possibility exists. To fear uncertainty is to fear life's very essence. To embrace uncertainty is to live with curiosity, openness, wonder. Children embody this openness. They step into each day not knowing what will happen, and they delight in discovery. They fall, they scrape their knees, they cry, and moments later they laugh again. They do not carry fear of tomorrow's fall because they live in the immediacy of now. As adults, we accumulate fears. We project them into the future. We build walls of protection. But in doing so, we lose the freshness of presence. To return to childlike openness is to unlearn fear, to meet life as it comes. This does not mean recklessness. It means trust balanced with awareness. Just as a child eventually learns not to touch fire, we too learn from experience. But learning is not the same as fearing. To learn is to grow wiser, to fear is to shrink. Wisdom expands life, fear contracts it. The path is to live wisely, not fearfully, to use discernment without falling into paralysis, to act with awareness without being imprisoned by anxiety. Ultimately, the choice before us is between two postures: contraction or expansion. Fear contracts, it pulls us inward, closes us off, makes us defensive. Love expands, it opens us outward, connects us, makes us generous. When fear rules, we hide. When love rules, we shine. Both postures are available in every moment. The more we choose love, the weaker fear becomes. The more we choose expansion, the less grip contraction holds. This is why so many spiritual traditions teach the same core lesson: that perfect love casts out fear, that trust dissolves anxiety, that surrender leads to freedom. These are not abstract doctrines, but practical truths, discovered again and again by those who live them. Fear is not overcome by argument, but by experience. By stepping into trust, by releasing attachment, by living in love. Each time we do so, we taste freedom, and that taste encourages us to continue. In the end, fear is a shadow. It looks immense, but it has no substance. It grows large only when we turn away from the light. When we face it, it dissolves. The light of awareness, of love, of trust, reveals that fear was only ever a projection, an echo of attachment, a denial of change. When we see through it, we laugh at how it once ruled us. We discover that beneath fear, life is vast, open, and free. Fear often disguises itself in subtle ways. It does not always appear as trembling, panic, or obvious dread. Sometimes it hides beneath ambition, beneath control, beneath the constant pursuit of certainty. Many people believe they are strong because they dominate, because they plan obsessively, because they strive tirelessly. Yet often beneath this surface lies fear. Fear of failure, fear of insignificance, fear of being unworthy. The restless drive to prove oneself, to accumulate, to achieve, is frequently an attempt to outrun fear. But fear cannot be outrun. The faster we run, the more it follows, for it lives within us, not behind us. Consider the person who never rests, who works endlessly, chasing success. Outwardly, they may appear confident, disciplined, unstoppable, but inwardly, they may be haunted by the fear of not being enough, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of being forgotten. Their achievements, though impressive, cannot soothe this fear because the fear is rooted not in the outer world, but in the inner. Recognition, wealth, power. These cannot erase the whisper of unworthiness because the whisper comes from the ego itself. In the same way, the person who seeks control over every detail of life may seem meticulous, responsible, reliable, yet beneath the surface there may be fear of chaos, fear of uncertainty, fear of losing ground. They tighten their grip on everything: schedules, relationships, outcomes, believing that control will protect them. But life resists control. The more tightly they grip, the more tension arises, and the more fragile they feel. Control does not banish fear. It magnifies it because every deviation becomes a threat. Even the pursuit of security is often rooted in fear. People save endlessly, insure everything, plan every contingency. Of course, prudence has value, but when driven by fear, it becomes bondage. No matter how much one saves, there is never enough, for the fear imagines infinite risks. No matter how carefully one plans, uncertainty remains, for life cannot be fully predicted. Fear disguised as prudence never finds rest, because it is chasing an illusion, absolute safety. When we begin to see these disguises, we realize how pervasive fear is. It hides not only in our obvious anxieties, but also in our ambitions, our habits, our identities. It shapes our choices, often without our awareness. And so the path is not merely to remove fear, but to illuminate it. Awareness is the key. When we bring awareness to fear, it loses its grip. When we see clearly, this striving is not true freedom, it is fear in disguise. We begin to release it. This is where meditation, reflection, or simply mindful presence becomes powerful. In stillness, fear can no longer hide behind activity. When the mind quiets, fear reveals itself, sometimes as a restlessness, sometimes as a subtle unease, sometimes as a tightness in the body. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming. But if we stay present, if we watch without judgment, we begin to see fear as it is, a sensation, a thought, a movement of energy. Not a monster, not a prison, but a passing wave. The practice then is not to fight fear, but to watch it. Fighting fear only strengthens it, for resistance gives it power. Watching fear with calm awareness dissolves it. When you say, "Here is fear, arising in me, passing through me," you step outside its grip. You become the witness, not the prisoner. Fear still arises, but it does not rule. It comes and goes like clouds passing through the sky, while your awareness remains vast, open, unshaken. Over time, this practice transforms your relationship with fear. You no longer see it as an enemy, but as a messenger. Fear tells you where you are attached, where you are clinging, where you are denying impermanence. Each time fear arises, you can ask, what am I holding on to? What am I unwilling to release? What illusion am I protecting? In this way, fear guides you toward freedom. It points to the chains so that you may unlock them. It is important to understand that freedom from fear does not mean fear never arises. Fear will continue to appear because the body, the ego, the mind are wired for survival. The difference is that fear no longer dominates. It arises. You see it, you understand it, you release it. It passes like a shadow. You do not act from it, you do not obey it, you do not build your life around it. This is true liberation, not the absence of fear, but the absence of fear's control. When this liberation begins to unfold, a new way of being emerges. You act not from fear, but from clarity. You love not from clinging, but from fullness. You live not from control, but from trust. Choices become lighter, freer, more authentic. You no longer need to prove yourself because you no longer fear being unworthy. You no longer need to control everything because you no longer fear uncertainty. You no longer need to cling to possessions or people because you no longer fear loss as annihilation. This transformation radiates outward. A person who is not dominated by fear becomes a source of calm for others. Their presence reassures because it is steady. They do not panic in crisis. They do not lash out in insecurity. They do not manipulate to soothe their own anxiety. Instead, they embody trust, openness, and love. Others feel safe in their presence, not because they offer guarantees, but because they radiate freedom. Such a person becomes like a tree, rooted, spacious, offering shade. History has shown that those who transcend fear often become beacons for humanity. Think of those who stood for truth even in the face of persecution, who loved even in the face of hatred, who trusted even in the face of death. Their courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to be ruled by it. Fear arose, but they stood firm in love, and their example continues to inspire, showing us what is possible when we are no longer slaves to fear. Each of us is capable of this, not only saints or heroes. In our daily lives, small acts of freedom from fear transform everything. Speaking honestly when we are tempted to hide. Choosing kindness when we are tempted to protect ourselves with cruelty. Letting go when we are tempted to grasp. These small acts accumulate, gradually reshaping the way we live. Step by step, we learn to trust life more deeply, and fear loses its hold. The journey is ongoing. There will be moments when fear grips us again, moments when attachment tightens, moments when trust falters. This is natural. The path is not perfection, but practice. Each time fear arises, it is another opportunity to see, to release, to grow. Each stumble becomes part of the dance, each setback part of the unfolding. Over time, fear diminishes not by force, but by gentle awareness, persistent trust, continual letting go. In this way, life itself becomes the teacher. Every challenge, every loss, every fear is an invitation. The question is whether we respond with contraction or expansion, with clinging or release, with fear or love. The more we choose love, the freer we become. The freer we become, the more we radiate freedom to others. And in this ripple, fear's grip on the world begins to weaken, one heart at a time. There is a peculiar thing about fear. It feeds upon imagination. The body's natural fear is simple, direct, fleeting. When you walk near a cliff and your knees tremble, this is the body's way of protecting you. When you touch fire and pull back, this is the body's intelligence. But the fear that dominates most lives is not of this kind. It is not the momentary warning of the organism, but the endless projection of the mind. The mind imagines countless dangers, countless scenarios, countless catastrophes. It spins entire worlds out of a single sensation, and then we live inside these imagined worlds as though they were real. This is why people lie awake at night worrying about what might happen tomorrow, what might collapse next year, what others might think 10 years from now. The mind builds a theater of fear, a stage filled with endless dramas, none of which exist outside thought. The body feels a flutter, a tremble, a tightening in the chest. Left alone, it would pass in moments. But the mind leaps in. Ah, this is fear. What if I fail? What if I am rejected? What if ruin awaits? Suddenly, a simple ripple of energy becomes an entire identity, a whole narrative about failure, rejection, destruction. The sensation was small, but the story is immense. Here lies the great distinction. Biological fear protects life. Psychological fear prevents living. Biological fear says, step back from the edge. Psychological fear says, what if there is an edge somewhere tomorrow? The first keeps you safe, the second keeps you trapped. And because the second never ends, it always imagines new threats. You can spend an entire lifetime in bondage without a single actual danger present. The tragedy is that most people never question this process. They take the story for reality, the symbol for the thing itself. They confuse the map with the territory. To say the word fire is not to be burned, but to say the word fear often makes us tremble. The sound itself conjures ghosts. We live in a world of words, and words can become prisons. When you call a sensation fear, you have already created a narrative around it. But if you feel without naming, if you allow the sensation to pass without words, it remains only a ripple, a breeze, a wave in the body. It has no claws, no teeth, no permanence. This insight changes everything. To feel without naming is to cut the chain of imagination. Instead of spinning endless stories, you rest in direct experience. A tightening in the chest is simply that, a tightening. A flutter in the stomach is simply that, a flutter. They come, they go. They do not define you. They do not bind you. You are not the story your mind writes about them. You are the awareness in which they appear and disappear. The difficulty is that the mind resists this simplicity. The mind thrives on stories, on explanations, on analysis. When fear arises, the mind insists we must fix it, fight it, do something about it. But this very insistence fuels the fire. Like quicksand, the more you struggle, the deeper you sink. Resistance multiplies what it seeks to banish, and in contrast, simple observation dissolves. Watching fear without judgment, without resistance, without narrative allows it to fade. It has nowhere to stand when you refuse to play its game. To practice this is not easy at first. The habit of naming, of storytelling, is deeply ingrained. But with patience, awareness grows. You begin to notice the moment the story arises, the moment the mind says, "This is fear and it means disaster." You catch it, you smile, you let it go. You return to the sensation, the raw experience, the simple fact of being. Slowly the grip loosens. Fear remains, but it becomes thin, transparent, insubstantial. It loses its authority. This practice is not about denial. It does not mean ignoring real dangers or pretending life is without risks. Biological fear remains valid, and wisdom listens to it. But psychological fear, the kind that breeds suffering, can be seen through. The key is to discern between the two. Is this fear pointing to an immediate reality, or is it only imagination? If it is the former, respond wisely. If it is the latter, rest in awareness and let it pass. Over time, this discernment becomes second nature. You begin to live lighter. Worries lose their weight. Anxieties lose their edge. The future no longer looms as a shadow because you realize it does not exist yet. The only reality is this moment, and in this moment, most of the time, you are safe. The body breathes, the heart beats, life flows. Fear of tomorrow is only a phantom haunting today. This realization does not come all at once. It unfolds gradually through practice, through patience, through many small awakenings. You begin to see how much of your life has been shaped by imagined fears, how many opportunities you refuse, how many joys you delayed, how many connections you avoided, all because of a story about what might go wrong. And you realize with some sadness how much of life was wasted in service to ghosts. But that sadness itself becomes part of the awakening. It fuels your resolve not to waste the present any longer. The mind will still create stories because that is its nature. But you learn not to believe them. You watch them rise and fall like waves. Sometimes they are loud, sometimes quiet, but always impermanent. You are no longer caught in their net. This is the freedom awareness brings, the ability to live in the present without being enslaved by the future. And in this freedom, love flourishes. For love requires presence, openness, vulnerability. Fear closes the heart, but awareness opens it. When you are no longer consumed by imagined dangers, you can meet others as they are, not as threats, not as projections, but as living beings. Love arises naturally when fear recedes, just as light shines when clouds part. This is the gift of understanding fear, not its elimination, but its transformation. Fear becomes a reminder to return to awareness, to presence, to truth. Each time it arises, it calls you back to the moment. Each time you see through it, you deepen your freedom. Life becomes less about avoiding danger and more about embracing reality. The ego is always afraid because it is always trying to control. From this urge to control arises an endless chain of fears. Fear that people will not behave as we expect. Fear that tomorrow will not match our plans. Fear that the world will slip from our grasp. Yet life has never once obeyed such control. It moves like a river, flowing freely, changing constantly, never pausing to ask our permission. And the harder we try to dam it, the more turbulent it becomes. Our struggle to master life creates the very chaos we fear. The secret, then, is not to fight the current, but to surrender to it. Surrender is not weakness, nor is it passivity. It is the recognition that life is larger than our maps, wiser than our plans. To surrender is to trust the river, to lean into its flow, to realize that the same current which carried you from your first breath will carry you to your last. Nothing has ever been outside of this current. Every twist, every fall, every detour belongs. There are no mistakes in the river, only bends we did not expect. When we surrender, fear begins to dissolve. We no longer grip life with white knuckles, desperate to hold it still. We no longer measure every event against our fragile expectations. We no longer demand certainty in a world that is never certain. Instead, we learn to float. We allow life to carry us, not because we are helpless, but because we are held. And in this floating, in this trust, a new freedom emerges. Fear says, I am not ready. I might lose. I might fail. Love says, you are already where you need to be. Fear imagines 1,000 conditions for safety, 1,000 requirements for peace. Love recognizes peace in the very moment as it is. Fear clings, love releases. Fear resists, love allows. Fear demands, love receives. In surrender, love becomes possible, for love is not control and not possession. Love is the willingness to let life move as it will, to let others be as they are, to let yourself be carried without demanding guarantees. When we live this way, we begin to notice something remarkable. There was never an enemy at all, not in the world, not in others, not even in ourselves. What we thought were enemies, fear, arrogance, cruelty, were only masks, only shadows born of clinging. Beneath them was always life, flowing, caring, guiding. To trust this is to discover a profound rest, the rest of being exactly where you are, in the midst of the great dance of existence. This does not mean life will always be easy. Rivers flood, storms rage, branches fall. Pain and loss are part of the current. But even here, trust transforms everything. When pain comes, it is not punishment, but change. When loss comes, it is not annihilation, but transition. When death comes, it is not abandonment, but completion. The river has always carried us, and it will carry us still, even through the unknown. This realization does not make us passive. It makes us alive. We act not out of desperation to control outcomes, but out of love for the moment itself. We create, we work, we build, not because we are afraid of vanishing, but because it is our joy to participate in the flow. We love not because we fear loneliness, but because love is the natural expression of freedom. We care not because we fear chaos, but because caring is what arises when fear is gone. To live in this way is to discover that nothing is truly out of place. The twists and falls of the river, the detours and delays, all belong. What once felt like catastrophe reveals itself as transformation. What once seemed unbearable reveals itself as passage. The current of life has always been wiser than our plans, and when we trust it, we see the hidden harmony behind apparent disorder. Fear will still whisper from time to time. The ego will still tremble, still reach for control. But now we know its nature. We see it as a shadow, not a truth. We smile at its tricks, for we have seen through them. And when fear arises, we return again to surrender, again to trust, again to love. This is the rhythm of freedom, the practice of a lifetime, the gentle art of letting go. In the end, what remains is astonishingly simple. There is life flowing. There is awareness, witnessing. There is love arising. Fear was only ever the fog that obscured this simplicity. When the fog clears, the river shines, the dance reveals itself, and we see that we were never abandoned, never separate, never alone. The same power that spins galaxies, that lifts tides, that carries seasons, has carried us all along. To live in this recognition is to rest at last, to see that nothing is missing, nothing is broken, nothing needs to be controlled, to feel that even now, in this very moment, everything is as it should be. The current of life holds us, guides us, carries us endlessly onward. There is nothing to fear because there was never anything chasing us at all. Only life forever flowing, forever holding, forever moving on.